Greetings to you. This is the first of 6 sessions I'm doing on the 4 Gospels. These could be used for a Lent course. They are, in fact, a replacement for the Bible Day, which we'd hoped to be able to have in Northampton with a repeat in Peterborough. With the way things are planning and the way people's reluctance and possibly difficulties about meeting together, we've decided one more year to do the Bible Days online in a different version. I'm sorry we can't meet together, but these are my contribution. I think we'll be having some online workshops and other activities as well. I say 6 talks. The first and the 6th are rather shorter, or will be, than the others. There'll be 1 talk, 2, 3, 4, 5 on each of the 4 Gospels. The first one is an introduction of a kind, and the 6th one a different sort of introduction, or an appendix to the 4 Gospels. If you just want to do 5 studies, I suggest watching talks 1 and 6 as the first session, and then 2, 3, 4, 5. Or you could do 6 sessions, but a warning that 1 and 6 are shorter than the others, and 2, 3, 4, 5 really major on the content of the Gospels. 1 and 6 are a bit more about background and thematic ideas around the Gospels. In this first talk, I'm entitling it My Favourite Gospel, which is a question people ask me, and I guess other preachers from time to time, which is my favourite Gospel. And it's a fair enough question, because we've got 4 of them, 4 different accounts in the Bible of Jesus' life and ministry and death and resurrection. And it might seem odd that we've got 4. I'm going to spend a bit of time on that question in this first session and in number 6. But which is my favourite? Well, the simple answer, the simplest answer I can give is it's the one I'm reading at that time, because I love all 4 of them, and the chance to read, study, preach, teach any one of them just thrills me and is so exciting. I love all 4. Whichever one I'm in at the moment really fills me and thrills me, and that's my favourite. I wouldn't want to pick and choose. Now, partly that's because each of them is presenting Jesus and challenging us in our hearing and seeing and encounter with Jesus, each one doing it in a different way. We've got 4 different witnesses. I use the word slightly loosely because 2, maybe 3 of them, I think, were eyewitnesses. 1 and a half probably were picking up many of the accounts, or all of the accounts, from other people. They'd interviewed witnesses, if you like. So it's not all entirely eyewitness, but you've got 4 different accounts. You might say in modern terms 4 different biographies, though I'm not sure that's the best word for most of them. 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus from different perspectives. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John were different people, different backgrounds, very different at times, and they saw things differently. I don't know if you've ever been to a court case or studied a court case. Of course, you'll have seen some on television where witnesses give slightly different accounts that might even, to some extent, appear to be contradictory or incompatible. And yet they're each describing the same event, usually as honestly as they can. It's the way we look at things is very difficult and very complicated. If you and I observe the same event, we will describe it differently. And we don't say you're right and I'm wrong, or the other way around. We understand that different perspectives are useful, and that different perspectives, although they might appear to contradict slightly, actually give us a clearer view of what was really going on, what happened, what there was to see. And it may be literally a different angle of view. I'm standing behind or to one side and you're in front when someone is doing something. Simple as that, where you will see different things. It might be all sorts of background and things we know about the person or the situation, or things to do with us and our education and the way we use language or the way we prioritize and process things in our brains, that we will say things differently. And a really wise jury or judge, if we're in a court case, will want to listen to these different witnesses and try and work out from a number of different perspectives what's going on. So in other words, in order to know fully how we see Jesus at the Last Supper, the breaking of the bread, to have three different accounts of it is no bad thing. There'll be some similarity, some occasions where it's near identical, but somewhere things are just slightly different perspective. The writers may have put things in a different order for a different reason. In Jesus' three temptations, some of the gospel authors don't put them all in the same order. Fascinating. What's going on? Does that mean they're wrong, or it's made up and incompatible? What does it mean they're thinking and reflecting and telling the story in their way? It seems to me, in God's wisdom, what we have is four different people, each telling the story in their own way, each with a different audience in mind, each with a different style of writing, each with a different way of thinking. And together, you get the story of Jesus. Now, I love, in different ways, Matthew's Gospel and Mark's and Luke's and John's. Each of them makes me think slightly differently about Jesus. Each of them makes me approach the miracles, the parables, and so on differently. And of course, the two that give us the Christmas story, Matthew and Luke, tell it quite differently from different points of view. It seems to me this is good. It's building up a picture. It's actually saying the fact that we've got four of them and they do things a bit differently. It's actually saying no one account would give the sort of rounded picture that we need. Because when you ask me which is my favorite gospel, the question I want to answer is, do I want to know Jesus? Well, yes, I want to know Jesus really well. And I want to know the story of what he did here on earth really well. And to have four different angles on that, four people each presenting it their way, seems to me I'm going to get a better picture of Jesus. I'm quite a keen follower of history, and especially church history. I love reading church history, and when I can, getting chances to talk about it. And some of the big stars or big themes or movements in church history, you can't just read one book about the person. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury during the Reformation, when England stopped being part of the Roman Catholic Church and what we now have as the Church of England began. When I was in my late teens, I read a biography of Thomas Cranmer. It's great. It excited me about his thinking and his strengths and weaknesses, his bravery, his mistakes, and his huge wisdom. Since then, I've read a number of other different biographies of Cranmer by different people, each coming with a different angle, some more critical, some more supportive, some looking at one sort of detail, some looking at different sorts of detail. I have a much better picture of Cranmer from reading a number of different biographies than from reading just one. What do I actually want? Do I want to read Dermot McCulloch's biography of Cranmer, which is wonderful and probably the best? Or do I want to know more about Cranmer? In which case I should also read Jasper Ridley's account, which is quite different from Dermot McCulloch's. That's the sort of thing we're talking about here. We read the Gospels because we want to know about Jesus. And we want to hear Jesus speaking to us. And we want to understand his birth and his ministry and his passion and death and resurrection. And to have different perspectives, that's exciting. Not just one, but four. Now, each of them is relatively short. Each of them is spending most of its time on just 3 years, the last 3 years of his earthly life. Most of them are spending a hugely disproportionate amount of time on the last week of his life, what we would call Holy Week. That's important. That tells us what the gospel writers think is most important very clearly. But each of them approaches it differently. And at one time or another, each one can be very, very different. John is more obviously different from the other three a great deal of the time. But each of the other three, that are sometimes called the synoptic gospels, where they're looking together, if you like, they seem to have some common material, common quotations and so on, and a similar structure. But each of those three differs from the others wildly in different ways. And we'll come to that when we look at them. We're going to do one talk on each of the four Gospels, but during those I won't restrict myself. I will, when we're looking at Matthew, there'll be some comparison between him and the other three and so on. Having four different Gospels is great. My favorite Gospel, I suppose, is the Gospel that helps me get to know Jesus best. And that is the one I'm reading at the moment, but it's also the one I'm reading in the light of the other three. You don't want to take them out. Remember some years ago, and I understand the point of it, people were printing and selling little booklets of Luke's Gospel, Matthew's, Mark's, John's. Well, fine, yes, get the point, very short little paperback. It's an easy read. And it's not, part of a big heavy tome. I can get the point, but actually they're not meant to be separate. They're bound together in the Bible, and the very, very early Christians understood that they belonged together as well. So absolutely, the favorite gospel is the one I'm reading at the moment because it tells me about Jesus. But I read each of them in the light of the other three. And in fact, properly in the light of the rest of Scripture. That's something we can do more and more as we get on in the Christian life, and we've read more of the Bible and read it a bit more often. But each time I read the Gospels, I find some other connection with the Old Testament or with another part of the New Testament that I've missed or haven't really taken on board before. They're part of a whole, they're part of a bigger picture. So don't take them and separate them and say, oh, Luke's my gospel, I'm going to stick with that. You can be hugely, greatly blessed if you read Luke and if you understand Luke's gospel fully, but you'll miss something if you don't read the others. And if you don't realize what Luke included and why and what he didn't include and what that might mean. So favorite gospel, all of them, or whichever I'm reading at the same time, or maybe that comes to the same thing. We're going to, as I say, spend time on each of the four Gospels, and then I'm going to conclude in a sixth talk with looking at some of the questions that people often raise that can cause difficulties, differences, disagreements, dates of the Gospels, who actually wrote them, how reliable they are or aren't as an account. Those are important things to look at, but they're not as important as looking at what the Gospels say. So we're going to move to that in the 4 main talks. Bless you.